So with this, the first thing you have to do and most of you who are in cybersecurity probably know this, and even my PMP guy, he's an expert in project management. But the first thing we do and everything on this exam is around the CIA triad. And that's the confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So everything we do here is about protecting one of those things. And the thing about it is that, and somebody might want to go mute. I'm hearing a lot of static in the background. But anyway, what happens is that when you're answering these questions, always think about the CIA triad and what you're trying to protect. When we think about a business have different levels of the CIA triad. For instance, if you think about Amazon.com, you know that their main thing is availability. They need to be up and running so people can buy stuff while they're online. Not so much confidentiality and integrity. Now, they want that because they want to keep your accounts confidential, and they want to have integrity in their sales system. Nothing's getting changed, but different organizations need different aspects of this. If you think about a bank is more up for integrity. They want to make sure that their transactions have the integrity that they need for those transactions. We call something called a whole transaction. And to give you an example of this, and Guy probably heard this before, but if I have an ATM machine and Guy and I walk up to the machine, and at the same time, we're going to draw money out of the machine. And let's say that the machine has $1,000 in the account, and we both going to take $100 out. I say, Guy, let's push the button at the same time and see if we both take out 100 at the same time, maybe the machine only show 900. Well, they have something called a whole transaction. It's going to do one, even though we push the buttons and do everything at the same time, it's going to do one transaction first for integrity purposes, make sure that transaction goes through and that $100 is deducted, and then it'll allow this other transaction. So our money would not come out at the same time. So I would not be able to game the system. They keep the integrity of that system. So let's get into the CIA triad. This is what it looks like. Again, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And I'm going to talk about each one of these as we go. When I talk about confidentiality, this is the first principle that we have for confidentiality. We're thinking about the measures or the procedures we use to make sure that we're protecting the secrecy of the data, the objects, and the resources that we have. Matter of fact, let me go ahead and say this early, even though we're going to talk about it later. We are subjects. Anything that manipulates data or machine is a subject. And the passive thing that we're manipulating is an object. So I'm going to talk a lot about subjects using objects. But by the way, an object can become a subject. So let's say I'm running a program. That program is an object now. But that program has to go out and do a data call on a database. Now that program becomes the subject, and the database is the object. So a subject can become an object. The one that's taking action is the subject. The one that's having action upon it is the object. So with confidentiality, we're looking at things like the sensitivity of the data, discretion. It's discretionary as to me allowing you to see this confidential information. We're going to look at the criticality of that information, how we conceal the information. By the way, concealment itself is not security. I'm going to talk about that, a concept called security by obscurity, but we get into that. We're keeping things secret, private, secluded, isolated. All these are the terms that you see and hear when we talk about confidentiality. Now, I do want to touch on them just a little bit because they're in the book and you will see them. So sensitivity refers to the quality of the information. Okay, how can that information cause harm or cause damage to individuals or facilities if that information is released? That's the sensitivity of it. Discretion is the act of making a decision where an operator or a subject can influence or control disclosure of that information, and that can cause harm or damage. We'll talk about that later as well. Criticality is the level to which information is mission critical, and that's how it measures the criticality of it. How mission critical is this information? Concealment is the act of hiding, of course, or preventing disclosure to the information. Secrecy is the act of keeping something secret, preventing the disclosure of that information. Privacy, it refers to keeping information confidential. Seclusion involves storing something out of the way so people can't see it. And then isolation is keeping something separate from other things. I'm just going through these because you'll see some of these used, and you have to know the differences between the terms. Because you're like, what's the difference between secret and private, Derek? Or sensitive and secret? It's all sensitive. So there's a difference there. Please stop me whenever you have a question and chime right in. Right now, I'm not seeing you all. So if you need to ask a question, just jump right in and ask your question. Then we have integrity. Integrity is, I have 3 different slides on this, but integrity is basically preventing unauthorized subjects from making modifications. Now, that's not it. I prevent unauthorized subjects from making modifications, but I also want to prevent authorized subjects from making unauthorized modifications. Okay, what do I mean by that, Derek? Well, what I mean is this. If I'm working at a bank and you're a bank teller, and the bank teller is able to take your money in and make a deposit. However, I don't want that bank teller to be able to take your money out and put it into a secret account that they have somewhere else. You know, they are not able to, we're going to talk about split knowledge and split duties and all that. They are not able to do a full transaction on their own. They have to bring the bank manager over or something like that. We have something called a salami attack. A base salami attack is when it's just like taking salami and cutting off little pieces. That bank teller could take a penny or a nickel out of every account in the bank and put it in another account. You would never notice a nickel missing or a penny missing, but that could become millions if they have millions of customers. If that person is allowed to do the entire transaction, take your money in and then transfer that money out to a different account. So we want to avoid things like that. That's what I mean by preventing an authorized person from doing something that's unauthorized, okay? Also, maintaining the internal and external consistency of objects. We don't want things to be changed when they're not supposed to be changed. Everybody good? Mm-hmm. That's part of integrity. We're not done yet. All right. Part of integrity is that we want to have these characteristics. Okay, this is dependent on these things, these concepts. First of all, we want things to be accurate, be correct and precise. I gave you that example of me going up to an ATM machine. We both trying to take money out. That would not be correct and precise if it allowed us to do that. And now it shows $900 instead of $800. It should show. Integrity is also truthfulness, being a true reflection of what actually occurred. A transaction occurred where both of us took $100 out. So it needs to be truthful. And I'm just giving you that as one of the examples. Has to be authentic, being authentic or genuine transaction or characteristic or condition. Has to be valid, being factual, logically sound. And we have to have something you're going to see a lot called non-repudiation. Non-repudiation is going to be on the test quite a bit. And it's a concept that you're all aware of, but you might not know you're aware of. Not being able to deny having performed an action or activity, or being able to verify the origin of a communication or event. So let me give you an example here. If you're sending email and you send an email to your boss saying, you know, I resign, I quit, you jerk, or whatever it is. I'm saying you, but here's what really happened in the background. You got up, walked away from your computer, and Guy came over and thought it was funny, and he sat down and he sent this message to the boss. Now, non-repudiation, to repudiate something means that you can say, I did not do that. But you can't do that here because your email has been signed with your digital signature. And that digital signature shows or IDs you as the person who sent that email. So now you're going to say, so now the boss is going to say, look, this came from your desk, your laptop, you did it, Derek. Well, you know, here's what happened really, and I do this on a daily basis. The restroom is right next to my office. So instead of taking my cat card out and logging out like I'm supposed to, sometimes I run right in there and do what I have to do, wash my hands and come back. During that time, that's when Guy sat down and said, I'm going to teach Derek a lesson since he never takes his cat card out. But with non-repudiation, you cannot deny that you performed that action. Is everybody clear on that? You're going to see this used throughout the course and a lot in the book and on the exam. If you have any questions, just stop me. Also with integrity, this way we build in accountability as well. Being responsible, obligated for your actions and results. It allows me to have, you know, that's integrity, right? But allows me to track what you're doing. We're going to talk a lot about accountability and then knowing and being able to speak up for your actions. Responsibility is being in charge or having control over something or someone. Completeness, having all needed and necessary components apart. That goes back to that ATM transaction. And also comprehensiveness, being complete in scope, the full inclusion and all that. But we're going to talk about this quite a bit as we go through the course. And y'all keep me up on the time too. What time is it? 7:02? Okay. Seems like it's been more time than that. The next concept, the last concept is availability. That's the third principle. Okay. And this means that the authorized subjects are granted timely and uninterrupted access to those objects that we're operating on. Okay. So things like usability, being easy to use or learn, being able to be understood. The thing is that when we build a product or a software or whatever, don't we want to build it for usability? That's the main thing. We want people to be able to utilize it. Now, a lot of these Internet of Things and a lot of the things that you use are not built with security in mind, but they're built with availability and usability. And we'll talk about this later. Next is accessibility, being able to use it, being able to have access to my data, to my software, and to my machines. Okay? The widest range of subjects can interact with resources that they need, regardless of their capabilities. And then timeliness. Timeliness is very important as well. Matter of fact, if you go to my websites, if it takes 5 seconds, 10 seconds for it to load, you're going to leave, and I'm going to lose a customer. So timeliness, being prompt, on time, reasonable time frame, all that goes in. I think one guy on here builds websites. I think he said, one of the folks. That's one of the things you look at. Not somebody else outside, but that's one of the concepts you have to look at when you're building your website. How long does it take for a page to load? All that makes a difference. Latency is what that's called. Latency is the lapse in response time. Any questions about the CIA? It's pretty simple so far. Believe me, it's going to get harder. All right. Now, there's some other concepts that we have to know. They call it the AAA services, even though you see a lot more A's than 3. It's called the AAA, and we call it the AAA on the exam. Now, these are the other security concepts that I want you to be aware of, these AAA services. Now, these 5 concepts represents the process of security, how we go through security and securing things. And let me just walk you through this. When we first get into a system, we have identification as the first step. So if you work for the government or you're a government contract, you get your laptop, you have to identify yourself, or even in the building, you have to identify yourself to the system. So how do I identify myself to my system? I put in my CAT card. So my CAT card identifies me as Derek Smith because it's built into the chip of that CAT card. But that does not authenticate me in yet, and that does not authorize me to do anything. So what do I have to do next? If I have 2-factor or whatever, I have to now put in a password. Maybe even use some biometric to get in. That biometric is going to authenticate me into the system. It says, okay, Derek belongs here. He identifies. So let me take a step back. Just because I put a CAT card into a laptop to use it, does that mean that that's Derek? Yes or no?
No, not at all.
Because I could have dropped.
You stole your CAT card. Yeah.
Exactly. Somebody could have stolen it. I could have dropped it in the hall. So somebody goes into a laptop and put it in, they think Derek is there. That's why identification gets me nowhere. So now I authenticated it. I put in a password. Now the password, or whatever, however many factors you have, is going to authenticate you and say, yes, this is Derek, and he belongs in the machine now. So that's the first step. But just because I'm authenticated into that laptop or into that enterprise or network does not mean that I'm authorized to see everything there. So the next step is going to be authorization. And now there's lots of different steps here. You're going to learn all this in the class. But let's say I'm using where I have to have a top secret clearance, all right? So top secret clearance don't mean I get to see everything that's top secret. It's going to be compartmentalized into what we call need to know and least privileges. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. So just because I authorize you into machine, authorization also deals with giving you access to the things that you authorize to see. And that's another service or another one of the A's that we have to deal with. Now, the next step you see is auditing, because not only do I want to authorize you into the system, I need to know what you're doing and where you're doing it. So auditing is going to look at logs and look at other mechanisms that we have in order to see what you accessed, what you did with that access that you had. So a couple of things you think about is Snowden, of course, or you think about one of you guys, you work Monday through Friday, and then I do a report and see that you were in the building on Saturday. One or two things happen. Either you had to do some work on Saturday and you were authorized in, or you had to, or somebody has your credentials and they're inside the system when they're not supposed to be there. But the thing is, I should get an alert when that happens. Now, Bruce is in my other class, and we just talked about this last night. But one of the guys said this just happened to him. You know, he was going in on Saturdays to do his homework. He's working on his master's degree, and what happened was that during that time, his director questioned him and asked him what he was doing the building on Saturdays. So that's part of the auditing process. Somebody needs to be looking at these things, or some system, if it's automated, you need to be looking at this and alerting people that there's something that needs to be looked at. And it might be that, you know, just why are you in the building on the weekends? Are you authorized to be here? And all this builds in accounting and accountability. The auditing gives me accounting of what you're doing, or accountability as to what you're doing, what you're accessing, and why you're accessing it. So that's your other A. I know it's more than 3 A's, but they call it the triple A. But accountability, because your auditing is going to give me that accountability. All right. Any questions about those? All right. So just know those concepts and how they work. But this is security, going through these steps. Now we're going to talk about all the different ways of getting to those steps as we go on. I'm going to pause for just a second. Even though we started the lesson at 6:30, we did get started at 6. Can I go to 7:30, or do you all need to stop for a break, a quick break? Anybody?
I think we want the CISSP, Derek.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to go to, she spoke first, and I'm going to go to 7:30, and then we'll take a break at 7:30. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Somebody had something to say? All right. About 7:20, I'll break and give you guys a break. Now, I mentioned a couple of things as we're going through. These are still the beginning concepts of cybersecurity. So these are the protection mechanisms that we're going to be learning about. This is the different ways that you can protect information. Let me tell you this, and this is Derek's soapbox. All these breaches that we see every day, it depends on one thing, the access. And if we can deny the person the access in the first place, a lot of the other stuff wouldn't happen. You know, we're going to talk about data loss protection and all that, because once a person is in the system, they become an inside threat. And to us, they look like a person that should be there. So when they're exfiltrating stuff like Snowden did, sending stuff out of the organization, we're usually worried about what's coming into the organization, but we're not looking at what's going out of the organization. We have to pay attention to that. So let's look at these protection mechanisms. First, we have layering, or defense in depth. So defense in depth, let me see if I'm sorry. So defense in depth means that we want to have different layers of protection. So let me think about this. Think about a ring, picture a ring, a circle, and picture 3 circles around it. So you have these concentric circles going around each other. I can take all my mechanisms. Let's talk about physical security. The building is in the center, and I have these different layers of protection. If I take the outer layer, the outer ring, and I put, I'm sorry, let me let somebody into the class. Somebody showed up for class here. All right. Hey, Ola, if I take the outer ring and I put guard dogs, I put a moat, I put cameras, I put everything at that outer ring. I got 10 devices out there and people at that outer ring. Do you all think I'm secure? Am I secure? That's a question for you all. Now, this is just the outer ring. I have 3 other rings on the inside leading to my building, but that outer ring, I have 10 devices there for security. How do you all feel about that? Nobody? All right.
Repeat it, please.
Okay, so I said that I have the building in the middle. I have 3 rings around that building. And in the outer ring, I have dogs, I have cameras, I have security guards with guns. I have everything out there in that outer ring. Am I secure? Is my building satisfactorily secure?
No.
No, it's not.
Why not?
Because you just have one layer of security. You have to have the other layers, like access and access.
Okay, good. So here's what happened. Amina's right. I have that outer ring protected, but all I have to do is slip past one of your things. I can slip by the dogs. I can slip by the guard when he's reading his magazine or looking at his phone like they all do and checking something out on the phone. Once I slip by that layer, I can go directly to your building. So now and can you guys go back on mute for me for a second? I hear a dog or something.
Oh, my bad.
That must be the restaurant. That must be.
Yes, Starbucks.
All right. So now that's what I'm talking about with layering. If I have 4 rings of security, 4 rings, I have to have security at each one of those. So if they penetrate one layer, they get to the second layer with even more devices and people on it. They get by that, I want to have another layer. That's defense in depth, not just in the outer ring, but at every layer should have multiple things at each one of those layers that you have to get by. The more I have in place, the better my defense is going to be. So our concept, if you're an architect or whatever, is that we want to build defense in depth. And now, all of you probably understand that because you're security and all that, but you'll be surprised at how many people in the field don't quite understand that outer ring with 50 items on it is still vulnerable because all I need to do is bypass one of them. All right. So that's the first concept, the first protection mechanism. The second one is abstraction. And that's, as they say, that's used for efficiency. So this is, I'll go to the book just for a second. It says the concept of abstraction is used when classifying objects or assigning roles to objects. The concept also includes the definition of the object and the subject types and objects, but abstraction is used to define what types of data an object can contain, what types of functions can be performed by that object, and what capabilities that object has. So we're going to define what those objects can do. And then what we're going to do, here's the next part. Abstraction simplifies security by enabling you to assign security controls to groups of objects collected by type or function. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take the similar items. If I have a database, let's say, I want to protect my database in a certain way. If I have a group of people I'm trying to protect, or a group of buildings, or a group of components, I group them together, and then I put the proper protections around them. That's the abstractions or the abstract groups. Sorry, let me let her back in. Somebody keep getting kicked out. Christine, I think you got kicked out again. I just let you back in. The next concept is data hiding. Now, data hiding is just what it is. It's hiding. It's preventing data from being discovered or accessed in the first place by a subject. But data hiding is not security. That's security through obscurity. So if you take something and you place it in your desk in the bottom drawer, and I'm a burglar and I break in, if I don't see it in the bottom drawer, I can't steal it. But that doesn't make it secure. It just means I did not find it. So data hiding is another mechanism that we have, but it's not truly security. Now we can hide things so well that it's not found by the bad guy, but there's nothing protecting it. That's data hiding. That's security by obscurity. We're going to talk a lot about that as we go through some of these protections that we use, such as steganography, for instance. That's hiding data in data, but that's not really securing that data. All right. One they give you in the book is that says that through obscurity is when a programmer is aware of a flaw in their software code, but they release the product anyway, hoping that no one discovers the issue and exploits it. Well, I think that's kind of how Microsoft works every day. That's why they keep pushing out patches, but they know they put out flawed stuff. Because sometimes the idea is to get something to market quickly, knowing that you're going to have to patch it later, or that there's a problem there. And the last thing, and this is to me one of the most important, because if you do this to everything, you have no problem. There would be, I don't care if you break into my bank, if you break into, I put out a couple of things in my blog today about Aetna lost 300,000 records. Somebody else I put out today, I can't remember who it is. But anyway, I don't care if you get your hands on my records if I encrypted them, because you'll get them, but you won't be able to read them anyway. So our next protection mechanism, and one that everybody should be using, is encryption. All right, and that means taking clear text or everyday English, if you're not familiar with that term, and turn it into ciphertext or scrambled text. And we're going to talk all about that in chapter 6 and some of the other ones when we start talking about algorithms and cryptography that you will learn in this class as well. All right, so you'll learn all about that as we go on. All right. Now, I'm going to take this time, and before I get into all this stuff, I'm going to go ahead and give everybody a break. I've been talking long enough. I know you're tired. This is how it's going to be, folks. You're going to get tired sometime in this class, but let's go ahead and take a break. I have 7:16. Let's take a 15-minute break, and let's come back at 7:31. All right, 7:31, 7:32-ish, because it might be about to change. All right, so everybody come back at 7:31.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Oh, I thought there was a question. All right. Go ahead and take a break, everybody. Let me get my screen back up. All right, somebody give me a shout out. Let me know you see the PowerPoint presentation, please.
Yes, sir. You can
All
see
right.
it.
All right, good. Let's do it. All right, now we're going to talk about, so we talked about the concepts of cybersecurity so far, and we talked about a few other things, the mechanisms that we use. Now I want to talk about the principles and how we put governance with security. So we're moving into the governance steps here, okay? And how we're going to align everything that we do with our security function. All right. So the first thing we have here is alignment to the strategy, goals, missions, and objectives. One of the problems we have is that oftentimes people see security as being in the way, as getting in the way of getting the job done and making money. And what I mean by that, they see me coming down the hall, they're like, oh, geez, here comes Derek again. What does he want me to do now? Or what does he want me to stop doing now? But that's not the idea. Our job is to enhance or enable everything else that an organization does. So again, I'm aligning that with the strategy of the organization, the goals, the missions, and the objectives. When I build my security policy is going to be based on that. Again, it's enabling security, right? So we're looking at things like, we look at the business and we look at the business case, and we see what the business case is. How are they going to use IT in order to be able to do whatever they're trying to do with the business? And as you all know, IT touches pretty much everything now. Oh, that my other guy is. All right, Mike, sorry about that. Glad you joined us. We're still in chapter 1. We're just really getting started. So if you have your books, and by the way, hopefully everybody's ordered their book now. If you have your book, I'm on page 15. If you want to follow along there. And Mike, I'll explain what the slides and things are to you afterwards and make sure you get everything. But anyway, we have the business case, the documented argument or position that we're going to use to define what's needed by the IT system. And with that, we're going to now go into how it's going to be able to enable the security that I'm talking about. Now, we have a security policy, and it's built on that business case that I'm talking about. So everything inside that policy should enhance or should be directly related to what we're trying to do as far as our goal, missions, and objectives are. Now, there's two ways that we can approach this. There's a top-down approach and there's a bottom-up approach. Now, we operate in the bottom-up approach. Top-down approach is going to be, of course, the CEO, the CFO, you know, maybe even the CISO if he's lucky enough. CISO is supposed to be C-level, but oftentimes they report to the CIO, which is a problem, or even I've seen some report to the CFO, which is even a bigger problem, you know, the money people. But we work from the bottom up, which means that we make security decisions and security recommendations from the bottom and hope that CEOs and CIOs and all that support our decisions. But that's how we work. Because what we want to do, as you see here, is get senior management approval. You all know this from being business people, but we need to get buy-in from senior management in order for other people to see how serious security is. For instance, we all have security awareness programs, right? And in that security awareness program, we teach people about phishing and about you know, how not to get taken advantage of as far as security is concerned, social engineering, and all that. However, if they don't see that the CEO and CISOs and other folks are taking this serious, they're not going to take it serious either. Most of your organizations, I bet, have a once a year cybersecurity awareness program where you have to go in once a year and you have to take a video course that you probably don't even watch. You just click the video to let it advance, and then you take the test at the end. It's pretty simple, and then you're certified for the year. But that's not what security awareness is all supposed to be about. And we're going to talk about that in later chapters, but it's supposed to be a continuous thing. See, education and training are two different things. I train you in a job skill or something I want you to do. But education means that I change your way of thinking. I educate you. You get your college degree to change your way of thinking. I educate you about security awareness so you can stop doing the bad behaviors that's going to lead to a security breach or something like that. So we need that senior management approval. Senior manager is usually for us the CISO or the privacy person, chief security officer, chief privacy officer, or ISSO or ISO, security officer, information security officer, or your InfoSec team or whatever it may be, reporting to those higher levels. As I said, now people are starting to see the CISO used more often than they were in the past. All right, that CSP is not right. That should be a CSO, chief security officer, not a CSP. So that's a typo on these slides. All right. So here's how security management works, or the security management plans. They fall into three different areas, and you're gonna need to know these for the exam. But this is pretty simple if you've been in business for a while. First, you have your. I'm sorry, somebody else needs to be admitted in. Okay, you're in, Mike, I think. All right. So first, you have your strategic plan, and your strategic plan is usually a 5-year plan, and it's going to be at that highest level. It's your long-term plan. It's usually going to be pretty stable. We're going to revisit that every 5 years, of course, when things happen. So that's going to define your organization's security purpose. When I'm talking about the security management plans, not the strategic plan for the organization, but for security. So it's going to give me our security function, our security purpose, but it's going to align with the goals, missions, and objectives of the organization, right? Because I told you it has to be in line with that. It also is used for planning. So we're going to plan those other pieces that I'm going to talk about based on that strategic plan. So for that strategy to happen, we move to the tactical plan. That tactical plan is the middle or the midterm plan. And it's going to give us details on how we're going to actually accomplish those goals that we got from the strategic plan that was set forth in that strategic plan. So usually this is going to be a year at a time. This year we're going to tackle something, but things are going to change technology-wise. Things are going to change in our environment. So now we have tactical plan for year 2. We revisit this tactical plan over and over again until we redo our strategic plan. It's going to be things like acquisition, hiring, budgets, maintenance plans, all those type of things happen on a yearly basis. And then we go down even further to our operational plan. And that's going to be our very short-term plan. It's going to be very detailed. It's based on our strategic and tactical plans. It's how we're going to do operational things on a daily basis. How we're going to spend that money that I got through the budget. How we're going to use our resources, how they're going to be allotted to the different projects. So these are our 3 levels: our strategic plan, our tactical, and our operational plan. And this is all basic stuff, so we're getting there. Then we have our organizational processes. So governance is the overarching plan of how we do our day-to-day work, our yearly work, when we addressing every aspect that exists within our organization, right? So our acquisitions, our divestitures, getting rid of our stuff that we don't need, our governance committees, all that falls into this security governance that we're looking at. The main thing we're trying to do is that let me take a step back. As far as security is concerned, we are overhead. We don't really bring any profit into our organization. So we have to figure out how we can be of value to the organization. Well, what we do is that we reduce things like data loss, downtime, failure to achieve the return on investment. See, we make the difference. When you have to explain as a CISSP how we're going to be of value to the organization, we talk about the money that we're going to save them or the reputation we're going to save them by ensuring that a breach does not occur. That's how we sell ourselves. Because CFOs, CEOs, things like that, they talk about money. They talk about value. And that's how we have to sell this to them. Now, we look at acquisition and divestiture risks. Inappropriate information disclosure. When we talk about acquisition and divestitures, we got to be cognizant of inappropriate information disclosure. We don't want people to know certain things at certain times. That's data loss before this thing takes place. We talk about the data loss. We're looking at making sure that we don't have downtime, as I said, and not achieving our return on investment. Another part of the organizational processes is change control. If you're familiar with IT, you're familiar with change control and changes taking place. What we have to ensure is that there's some type of change control management system that's in place. When I worked at the TSA, one time I had an individual, a system administrator, and people used to come up to him and ask him to make changes. And he would say, well, you know what, that's just a 30-second change, let me do it. That's just a 2-minute change, let me do it. Oh, that would take me no time, let me go ahead and do that for you. Well, as you all know, that's not the right thing to do. A small 5-second change could have devastating or exponential results on our system. Plus, if it did and I had to roll back the system, I won't even know what occurred because this was not documented. Every change at TSA was supposed to go to the change control board, no matter how small and minute it was. We have to have that type of granular control of that. So with change control management, what we do is we implement changes in a monitored and orderly manner. Changes are always controlled, not willy-nilly like this guy was doing it. Part of that is having a formalized testing process to verify that the change produces expected results. let me go back for a second. When we talk about changes, also the change should not happen in you if you can avoid it. Should not happen in your production environment, and you should only do it to certain environments first, or certain amount of computers first, to make sure it doesn't break anything. See, a patch can even bring our system down, as you probably already know that. So we have to have some type of formalized testing process to not only make sure that the patch or the change is going to take correctly, but also to make sure that we got the expected results from it. Okay? Just because I put a patch in place doesn't mean that patch is doing the expected results in my organization. And why not? Because it depends on the configuration of my environment. How have I configured this stuff in the first place to work along with that patch? And by the way, that patch could bring us down. At TSA, we stayed 2 iterations back on our patches. So now, number one, that's a risk-based decision, because being 2 iterations back means that I have vulnerabilities out there that has not been patched for 2 generations, okay? But we took that chance because it was more important for us to never go down. This was the no-fly list, for us to never go down. So we took the chance of staying 2 iterations back and made that risk-based decision. If it's the right decision, I won't say that it was or it wasn't. I mean, I had my feelings about it, and I was the ISSO. But this is what we chose to do based on our risk-based decision. They rather face that vulnerability and put a compensating control in place, which we'll talk about later. Okay, so we have to make sure we got the expected results. All changes can be reversed, also known as rollback or back out. Okay, if we put that patch in place and something happens that's not supposed to happen, because we've documented that change, we can now roll back to the last good image that we had, last good working process that we had, and try this again. That's why I said we don't do this in production. If you're fortunate, you have a development environment, you have a test environment, and you have a production environment. If you only have production environment, as I told you before, if we have 100 machines, we push the patch out to 10 of the machines. See how it affects them before we implement it environment-wide or enterprise-wide, okay? And then our users are informed of changes before they occur to prevent loss of productivity. We don't just push a patch out and say we did it and everything shuts down. We let them know by some manner, some mechanism, that a patch is going to be going out tonight or this morning or wherever it's going to be, but we inform the folks that it's going to happen. That's part of the management process. We're not done yet, though. The effects of the change are systematically analyzed and determine whether the security or business process are negatively affected. See, when we do a change control board, usually we have to do all this before we even initialize the patch. We have to say, okay, here's what we're going to change, and this is how it's going to affect every environment. So I have to know how it's going to affect every stakeholder that's going to be touched by that particular change. We have to know if there's an impact and what that impact is going to be. So we have to analyze it, determine what happened with the business processes. The negative impact of changing on capabilities, functionality, and performance minimized by doing it on a few at a time, or making sure we know what's going to happen when we implement this change. And then changes are reviewed and approved by that change control board or that change approval board that I spoke about. Pausing for a second for any questions. All right, so this is the change control process for this book and for this test, and we're going to talk about it in more detail later on. Again, if you have any questions, jump in at any time. Another governance principle is that of data classification. See, every piece of data needs to have classification of some sort, even if it's unclassified. My point is that we have to take the time to actually take a look at it and determine what that classification is. So first of all, why? It says it determines the effort, the money, and the resources. See, security is not free. You say, well, I would say that the best way to secure everything is to encrypt everything at the highest encryption level you can have. As a matter of fact, let's just put everything in a box and not let everybody touch it. It'd be very secure, but is it useful? I'm sorry, let me let somebody else in the class, another student. Hi, Anya, welcome to the class. All right, so again, with data classification, how much money are we spending? The more classification we need, the higher level it is, the more money we have to spend, and the more resources we need to protect it. So I couldn't say just make everything top secret and then I know I'm secure. Everything does not warrant top secret, and you may not want to spend the money for what it takes to make something top secret. Just think about it clearance-wise for you all. I have a couple of people who had TSSCI. If I remember correctly, I used to do background investigations, and a TSSCI clearance, now correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was somewhere around $40,000 to do this investigation. You know, secret was around 10, 15,000. It might even be different than that now. But you see, just if you're looking at clearance level, to be top secret costs a lot more money than to be confidential. All right, so that's going to be important for us. Now, when we talk about data classification, it's mainly the main objective for it is to formalize and stratify the process for how we're going to secure that data in the first place. And everything's going to be based on something called labels. It's going to be every piece of data. I'm not talking about putting a real label on a piece of data, unless it's a hard disk or something, or disk drive. But everything has to be labeled. Everything has to be classified. And let me go ahead and say this one. There's only one person who's able to do that, and that's the data owner. We're going to talk about data owners and data custodians and all that in a minute. But the data owner, the person who produces that data or owns that data, is the only one that can classify it and declassify it at a certain level. Now, these data classifications happen in government, they happen in military, but they also happen in the private sector or commercial, but it's a little bit different. So if you look at what I have on the slide here, you see that in the government or government contractors, we usually use top secret, secret, confidential, sensitive but unclassified, and unclassified. Now, there are other ones out there like SUI, classified, I can't remember what SUI, SCUI stands for, but these are the ones for the exam. And now over on the commercial side, for this exam, we have confidential or private, we have sensitive, and we have public information. And you're going to see these again as we talk more about classification levels in certain areas. Now, let me flip slides here. Now, as I was saying, we have to identify, first of all, who the data owner is, but also we got to identify the custodian for that person, for that data, and we have to define their responsibilities, okay? We have to specify the evaluation criteria. How do we evaluate that data to see what level it should be at, number one, how we should protect it, and how we should define that information. Then we classify and label every single resource. Every piece of information that's different has to have that labeling on it. Document it if we're going to have any exceptions. I'm going to cover a few other things in just a second. Select the security control for each level. We're going to talk a lot about security controls. You might want to jot down now 800-53 because that's our Bible for controls. That's NIST 800-53 if you don't already know it. We're going to specify declassification and external transfer if we do that. How long are we going to take it and how are we going to declassify this information? And then we're going to create an enterprise-wide awareness program around that data and how to handle it. Now, some criteria I want to talk about that's in the book about classification is some general common things you need to know about the information that you have, such as the usefulness of the data, the timeliness of that data, what's the value or cost of the data that we're classifying, how long should we keep it, what's the maturity or age of the data, and what's the lifetime of the data, or when is that data going to expire, are some of the things that we have to consider when we're starting to build this out. Okay? Now, I want to go back just for a second. There's a couple that I need to talk about when we talk about classification levels, just so you can know what they are as far as this exam is concerned. So when I talk about top secret, and if you don't have the book, you can look at the tape later on because there's something I want you to know here. So top secret, of course, is the highest level of classification. But here's what I want you to remember. The unauthorized disclosure of top secret data will have what's called drastic effect and cause grave damage to cybersecurity, to national security. You need to highlight that if you have the book, or you need to remember that. Top secret is drastic effects and grave damage, okay? So it's also compartmentalized on something called need to know. And need to know means this. Some of you might know this already, but if you don't, I'm being very basic here, so forgive me. Even though I know that on here we had Keith, who's our Navy commander, and we had, I think it was Damien, I think that's right. Both have top secret SCI clearances. But that does not mean that they can look at the same information. They cannot look at everything that's top secret SCI, okay, because it's compartmentalized. They have something called need to know. And Keith needs to know certain things. Damien needs to know certain other things, and they won't cross. You have to have a need to know for that information. Let's go to the next level, and that's secret. So secret is used for data of a restricted nature, okay? Now, here's the difference. The unauthorized disclosure of this data will have a significant effect, not the drastic, but significant effect, and cause critical damage. There's a question on this. That's why I'm emphasizing it. Top secret is grave damage. Secret is critical damage to national security. For confidential, used for data of a sensitive, proprietary, or highly valuable nature. The undisclosed disclosure of this, unauthorized disclosure of this, will have a noticeable effect and cause serious damage. Okay, so note that. Then sensitive but unclassified data is used to protect information that could violate the privacy rights of people. Privacy rights, okay? It's not technically a classification level, by the way. It's not top secret, secret, or confidential. It's a marking or a label to use to indicate that, you know, it's sensitive, but we don't want to get it out there. But it won't cause critical or grave damage or anything like that. And then, of course, we have unclassified, that even if it got out, it won't compromise confidentiality or any type of noticeable damage if the information got out. It's unclassified. Now, that's for the top secret stuff. All right, now let's go over to the commercial side. So commercial is a little bit different. Confidential on this side is the highest level of classification. And it's used for extremely sensitive or internal use only type information. All right, it's going to be proprietary or it's going to be confidential. You might see proprietary on the label instead of confidential or private. All right. For us, private information, which you see in the same box there, is used for data that's of private or personal nature, intended for, again, internal use only. Sensitive is used for data that is more classified than public data, okay? It could impact, the impact of this could occur for the company if sensitive data, or negative impact, I should say, could occur if this information get out. And then public, again, is public information. If it gets out, that's okay. All right? Any questions? All right. So now I'm going into organizational roles and responsibilities. And you see that data owner and data custodian that I talked about earlier. Let me do a quick time check. Respect for your time. All right. So in security, we have, well, first of all, everybody in your organization has a security role. And we're going to talk about this in the governance section and when we get to personnel. But in everybody's job description, this is on the exam, person's job description should also detail what their security role is. So even if your security role is to make sure you close out, well, this won't be in your job description, but to make sure you close out your computer every time you go to the bathroom, that has to be written somewhere. But your job description should point at everybody's responsibility for security, wherever that might be. All right. So let's look at these different roles that we have. The senior manager, the CEO, CIOs, whatever they may be, but their role is to this is the person who's ultimately responsible for the security maintained by the organization. Now, I'm not talking about CEOs and all that. This is the security roles that we have in our organization, the 6 security roles. So again, they're the ultimate responsibility. This could be the CISO, it could be the vice president of information security or whatever it may be. All the activities that we do have to be approved or signed off by this person. But this is the top level of security in the organization. Then we have you folks. We have the security professionals, all right? So you all are assigned and trained and experienced on, you know, the networks and the systems, and, you know, we have a security engineer who's responsible for directing the technical aspects of security, okay? Writing security policies, implementing those policies and all that. Again, the data owner is the person who is responsible for classifying that information. You will see that on an exam. For placement and protection with the security solution. See, based on what this person does and how they classify that information is how we're going to do our job, because it's going to be based on whatever label that person assigns. Now, the data custodian is the person who actually does the day-to-day responsibility. The data owner doesn't do the work. They just classify it and give it to you. The data custodian takes care of the daily CIA, triad. That's making sure everything is taken care of. Now, they do not have the ability. It's not designated, not designated, but delegated to them to change the classification. Now, in real life, it may be delegated. But for the exam, they do not have the ability or the right to declassify or classify the information. I'm saying for this exam, in case you see this in a scenario. Okay? The user are those regular users or operators. You know, they're the weakest link, number one, but they also have the lowest access and the need to know and things like that. And then we have an auditor role whose responsibility is to review and verify that the security policy has been properly implemented. Because here's the thing, everything that you do in security This is very important because in real life, I see this not happening quite often. Everything we do security should be tied to something that's in the policy. If that activity is not enhancing something that's in the policy, it's wasted activity because everything we do is driven by that policy. All right. And I often see this not happening. And just a quick story. One time, my CEO in the company I work for, Enlighten, where me and Keith met, he came to me and he had just gone to lunch with somebody. He came back and said, "Hey, I want this thing I saw. They showed me to it at lunch. Just showed this to me at lunch. It cost $10,000, Derek. I want it." And I asked him, I said, "Okay, so that's good. So what is it that we're trying to do with this?" "I don't know. I don't care, but I want it." I'm like, "Well, boss, we have this strategic plan and this is what we're trying to do. Which one of these things in the strategic plan is it going to allow us to do?" He's like, "None of them." You know, after we talked about it, he decided that that wasn't a good way to spend $10,000. Yeah, it was cool. You know, you could have it. And he was the boss. If he said buy it, we were going to buy it. But our job as security professionals, CISSPs, is to recognize the usefulness of it and recognize, is it enhancing what we're trying to do in our policy? So I hope I'm getting that across to you. And that's the auditor's job. They're going to go back and they're going to look at, not only that, but they're going to look at compliance and they're going to look at effectiveness reports and they're going to make sure that the components, the controls that we put in place are doing their jobs. And that's our job. Any questions? And hopefully I'm able to hear you all. Can I just get a whoop whoop so I can make sure I'm able to hear somebody? Does anybody say something?
Whoop, whoop.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, guys, I didn't know if I muted folks or not, so that's good. I can't see you right now. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about, and thank you all. I like that you all you played along. Whoop whoop. But anyway, with security control frameworks is next. So when we base our decision, when we think about the decision we're going to make as far as security is concerned, it's based on the frameworks that are available out there. We don't do it willy-nilly. But let me tell you this. In real life, I see people doing it willy-nilly. They take it and they just throw technology at it, and they throw components, and they throw parts over here, especially if they're not very experienced, or they're working for a small company, a doctor's office. Or a lot of people have an IT guy, and that IT guy is trying to do security and don't really understand what they're doing. See, security should be based on frameworks and guidelines, and these frameworks are going to guide us to what we're trying to do. At Computer Science Corporation, I was a security architect, and this is what this was driven home. And when we go look at a project, somebody would hand me a diagram, and they say, "Derek, here's the diagram, make us safe." That wasn't good enough. I needed to understand what it is that they were trying to accomplish with this with this enterprise or this network that they were building, so I can understand what type of framework I would use to put around that. It's not just, okay, I look at the diagram and say, "Oh, let's stick a firewall over here." I think an IDS would be good right there. And maybe we'll do a DMZ over here and we'll do a sandbox right there. That's not how it works, folks. We have to plan this out. So we have these security control frameworks that allow and help us to do that. The first one you see, and these are the ones that you'll find on exam. Well, you won't really see that OSS TMM I haven't seen any questions on that, but we're going to talk about it briefly. You really need to know ISO and ITIL, and I think we have an ITIL expert here now, but these are some of the frameworks that we will see. So the first one you see on there is COBIT. And first of all, let me take a step back. Well, no, I'm going to do this. So COBIT is the control objectives for information and related technology. What did you hear? Control objectives. What are the objectives that we're trying to accomplish with this system? As it says here, is a documented set of best IT security practices crafted by ISACA. I don't know if you all have heard of ISACA. ISACA has, they do the CISA certification and the CISM certification, security management, and they do the risk management and some other certifications. So these are their guidelines or their practices. Remember, these are best practices. So these are not mandatory, but these are recommendations or guidelines. We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes, of things that if you put them in place, these are best practices they've seen through our industry. So with COBIT, there are 5 key principles behind COBIT. Let me just see if yeah, here you go. Okay, here are the 5 principles. So principle number 1 is that you need to meet your stakeholder needs first. As I told you when I was an architect, first I have to understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish with this system before I can secure it. So I meet my stakeholder needs. Principle number 2 is make sure that I have coverage of the entire enterprise end to end, wherever that may be. It might be a land, where it might be in another country. Christine is now going global and working on global engagements, okay? So I have to look at what's happening end to end as far as my enterprise is concerned. That's principle number 2. You need to know these, by the way, and know which order they are, just in case, as I told you in the beginning, you need to reorder some of these. Principle number 3 is apply a single integrated framework. As I said, not willy-nilly, not a little bit of this and a little bit of that. You pick a framework that's going to supply your needs and you stick to it. And then you will have a holistic approach to your security, and then separate governance from management. Now, governance and management is 2 different things. Governance is that overarching idea of what we want security to be. But management is how we get it done on a day-to-day basis. Some of you are managers, some of you are leaders. A leader set direction, and a manager get it done. Okay? So we want to make sure that we separate those tasks and those ideas from one another. Okay? Now, in this, well, let me take a step back. They don't talk in your book about, well, we will later on, but I want to go back to this just for a second. So you have the open source security test and methodology manual tells you how to test your security methodology and your security controls. ISO, now this is important, this is on the exam, but ISO 27001 and 27002 are mostly for commercial security. We have NIST guidelines for government, and we have ISO procedures and controls for commercial. And also, this was invented so that we can speak the same language no matter what country we're in. We wanted what's called a common criteria. You probably heard of the common criteria, where if I say a firewall, everybody knows what a firewall is. Everybody knows what an IDS is. We speak the same language. So we're going to talk more about 27001 and 2 later on, but one is the guideline and one is the controls on the civilian side. And then we have ITIL, infrastructure library. We're going to talk more about these as we go on. Slides on this. All right, so there's a concept. This concept right here will get you in jail or keep you out of jail. Okay, this is on the exam. You will see this, so make sure you understand what they are. But they're very simple. But we have the concept of due care and due diligence, and we have something called the prudent man theory. When you go to court because now you've compromised 1 million records and something happened, they're going to look at you and ask, did he take due care, or she, or due diligence? So due care is using reasonable care to protect the interests of an organization. And due diligence is practicing the activities to maintain that due care. So what does that mean? If you're storing people's medical information, due care means that you have to keep that information private. They have that expectation of privacy, right? If you're collecting people's credit cards, due care means that you're going to put something in place to make sure that their credit card numbers don't get out. If you're not taking this basic level of responsibility, then you're going to be held accountable for your actions. Okay? And the due diligence is that once you do this, you maintain that effort. You continue to protect those credit cards or those medical records or your PII, your private information. So that's what due care and due diligence is, and you'll see questions on that. Now, here's where we are. We want to develop, document, implement security policy, standard, procedures, and guidelines. You have to know the difference between each one of these, what they are, and I'll tell you the rest that you need to know in just a second. So your security policy defines the scope of security needed by the organization. It's going to tell, again, that overarching ideas. This is our way of thinking, our worldview as we look at security. Okay, this is what we're trying to accomplish. It's organization. It could be organizational, or it could be issue specific, or it could be system specific, or whatever it is. It says regulatory is advisory and it's informative. Here's the thing: your security policies are your must-dos. These are the things that you absolutely must accomplish inside your organization. Okay. Now, informative policy could be just one. It's designed to provide you information or knowledge about specific things. It's to inform you, about things. Advisory is to advise you how to do it. It's going to discuss certain behaviors and activities that you have to make. And here's what's most important about policies. Policy is no good unless it also defines the consequences should you not follow this, should you violate the policy. So you have to have your consequences in there. And then regulatory is the guidance for industries or for government or whatever your legal standards and guidelines that you have to have. So those are the 3 different types of policies. Now, when I do an inspection of organization, all I'm doing is checking to see if you're following your own policy. If your policy say you retain records for 1 year, and I go into your safe and find records for 5 years from 5 years ago, you violate your own private policy. I'm going to fail you or write you up based on you violating your own policy. I am there to help you to make sure that your policies are being enforced and being followed. That's what it's all about. Now we have our standards, our guidelines, and our baselines. Now, policy is mandatory. Again, those are the must-dos. Standards also define compulsory requirements. These are must-dos. This is the standard that I set, and you must beat that standard. So standards are also compulsory, all right? Your standards are going to tell you basically what level, what compulsory requirements you have for your hardware, your software, your technology, what security controls you should have in place, and things like that. So the next level is baselines. They define a minimum level of security. This is the baseline that you have to meet in order to say that your system is secure. Let's say if you're a contractor and you want to meet government, if you want to have a government contract, they're going to say this is the baseline you must have. Now, let me say this about a baseline. Baseline don't mean good security. Baseline doesn't, hold on 1 second, let me see. Somebody is trying to, did somebody have a question? It just popped up like somebody had a question. No? All right. So your baseline is that minimum, but that don't mean it's good security. You know, if I say, okay, this is the minimum I need to be able to get I'm saying this because it's really happened. But with CMS, I was in charge with going out and looking at all the organizations that had contracts with CMS. And they met a lot of them were small doctor's offices and things like that, met the baseline requirement. If you say I need a firewall, I got a firewall. You say I need antivirus, I got antivirus. But that doesn't mean that that was enough there to protect the information that they were charged with protecting. Okay, the PHI, the health information. But they they were in compliance, so they can keep the contract. But they were still at risk of losing information if they didn't do something better, depending on what their situation was. So baselines are not are also mandatory, okay, because it's the minimum. You have to meet that baseline. Clear on that? Okay, the next step down are your guidelines. They offer recommendations on how standards and baselines are implemented. Guidelines are not compulsory, okay? They're best practices. So if you follow those, you know, you'll be doing good, but you don't have to follow them. By the way, what are NIST? NIST publications. NIST gives you guidelines. You don't have to follow NIST. This is not a government agency telling you that you have to follow NIST in order to be in compliance. Now, many government agencies adapt and adopt, but they adopt NIST guidelines for that purpose. Another quick story that I was doing work for Chevron in California, and they were asking me to establish their security, right? Security programs and stuff. And they told me, they asked me what I recommend for us to follow for guidelines, for a framework. And I told them I would follow NIST. And what do you think they told me? They're like, Derek, we're not a government agency. Why are we going to follow NIST? Why are you recommending NIST guidelines to us? Do you know your job? Here's the thing. I told them that although it's geared towards government computers, NIST guidelines are well defined. They're clearly defined. They cover almost everything, risk, controls, everything. And if you decide to adopt this, and then adapt it to your situation, modify it, you can't go wrong. And then Chevron now uses NIST guidelines, at least they were several years ago when I introduced it to them. So NIST guidelines is just not for the government. They're just guidelines. They're standards that's been vetted. Scientists have looked at these and tested them and put them out there, and they're good. All right, that's just kind of my soapbox. Understand the difference between standards, baseline, guidelines, and policy. Any questions there? Time check, 8:13. 8:30. Oh, we'll keep going for a minute. All right, here's the procedures. Standard operating procedures. They give you the detailed step-by-step how to do it. So your procedures are the next step down. This assures how to do it. Guy is a help desk guy. And me and him have spoken about this before. And he has standard operating procedures at the help desk that anybody can pick up the book and they can walk through these procedures and understand what they're supposed to do for their job. And that's what it's all about. In law enforcement, security, all of them have these procedures, these guides. So that's what they are. All right. Now they should be followed, of course, because these are the procedures: how to restart the system, how to give somebody a password back, whatever it may be. It's all covered in these procedures. Okay? You have these documents that you use for that. So there's a diagram of what you have: the policies and the weight of them as well. And you can put these in order: policies, standards and baseline, guidelines, and procedures. Now, I know we're all over the place. That's what this first chapter is about, giving you an overview of a lot of different things. So now I'm going to talk about threat modeling concepts and methodologies. Did I have a question? I just saw pictures pop up. Anybody have a question? Nope. Okay. So now we're going to talk about how do we identify the threat? How do we model the threat? You know, where is the threat coming from? Understanding the threat, categorizing them, analyzing them, identifying them in the first place. So threat modeling, excuse me, one thing I want to start with is that when I came from a law enforcement background, a lot of things that police officers do, law enforcement do, is that we're very reactive. When does the police usually show up? After the crime has occurred. When do detectives show up? They come after the crime has occurred. So we're very reactive. But in IT, and even in law enforcement now, but in IT, we want to try to be proactive. Now, it's very difficult for us because not only do we have to worry about the threat from people who are always trying to find a way to defeat our systems every day, but we have to spend 75% of our time worrying about compliance issues and things like that. So we don't have time for doing this. But this is what threat modeling is all about. Threat modeling is about trying to think about and come up with proactive measures when we're designing and developing our systems. Because remember, security starts at the beginning. We want a concept called security by design. We don't want to take a system, a network. Remember I told you they give me a network diagram and say secure this? What we're doing is in the design stage. You know, even if it's a building. When I used to be at the Defense Intelligence Agency, and now when I was there, they had one building, now they have two. I was in as part of the design of the second building. So when I looked at that, and we talk about physical security, I'm looking at blind spots. I'm looking at where they should put lighting. I'm looking at where cameras should be. And I'm designing a building with security already built in to make it even more secure. So we're designing systems in order to make them more secure with security in mind, with threat modeling in mind. So with that, let's take a deep dive into threat modeling and what it's all about. So they talk about Microsoft security development lifecycle, and when we talk about this, and this is an example, this is the process they have for them to consider and implement security at each stage of a product. So when they put out a product, you wouldn't know this because they're always patching. When they put out a product, they're talking about this. They're looking at something called SD3 plus C. You see here, security by design, security by default, security in deployment, and in communication. Okay, so it should be built in. And I talked about this proactive versus reactive approach when we're doing this. So that the proactive approach to threat modeling takes place during the early stages, the beginning, when we start to develop the system. And we're looking at the initial design, we're looking at specifications and all that. At the same time, we're looking at designing specifications for security. It's also known as being defensive or a defensive approach. So it's based on predicting what the threats are going to be, designing specific defenses for all the threats. You look at every asset and you determine what the threat is going to be to that particular asset, and then we're going to see how we're going to craft that process in. We don't want to rely on post-deployment updates and patches and stuff like that. We want to take care of this up front. That's why I'm surprised it's a Microsoft security development lifecycle, because it seems like they live by patches, but that's not the way they want to have it. Now, reactive, where we want to be, is where we produce something that's created and deployed with security already built into it. Okay? I'm sorry. We create something and we do security after the fact. So it's kind of like an afterthought with the security. And that's, of course, not the best way to design it. But here's the thing. That's how most people do it. And that's why they have to have patches and all that. But this is how most people do their design. Now, here are the steps for threat modeling. First, we have to identify the threats. And the threats are focused on your assets first. What is it that I'm trying to protect? You know, is it a building? Is it a data center? Is it a particular piece of software? So with that, I look at the assets, and then I'm going to be able to identify the threats for each one of those assets. Okay. Now, I look at the asset. I think about what can happen to this particular asset. And then I look at the attackers. And I'm going to determine what kind of people, who are the potential attackers, what kind of skills would they have, what type of things would they try to do in order to get this asset. Am I dealing with script kiddies? Am I dealing with sophisticated APTs, advanced persistent threats? Who are going to be my potential attackers? And now I'm starting to think about, again, my threat model. And let me tell you, I have two I'm trying to think of a word. I can't think of the word. It's getting late. But Keith and Damien are Intel folks. And this is just like Intel. In Intel, I'm thinking about who am I trying to protect or what am I trying to protect, and then who my potential attackers are. Same concept. Who's going to be, once I can identify who the attackers are and recognize what they are trying to achieve, then I can identify and protect my assets based on that. And the third thing is focus on software. And this is just when we talk about developing our software. We're going to look at potential threats against the software. What flaws can it have? Who's trying to get the software, and what might they do with that software, and putting protections in place in order to protect that software. Now, here's some schemes that we have for this, for threat categorization. One is called STRIDE, and you need to remember STRIDE. I'm sorry. Here's STRIDE for you. STRIDE is just something to keep in mind, so you can, something to think about, so you can keep in mind some of the type of attacks or threat categorizations that you can use. So the first thing is spoofing. And spoofing is where somebody impersonates someone or something else. So it could be your internet, your IP address being spoofed, your MAC address being spoofed. It could be you being spoofed, through some type of engineering, system engineering attack. Guy, I think, participated in this. I'm not sure. But we did our school building. We did a threat assessment of the school building. And we went down in the basement. I think, Guy, you were here with this, but we went down in the basement. Yep. And you remember that guy?
Yes, I did.
and there was a phone hanging on the wall to a government agency. And underneath, Guy, what was underneath that phone? You finished.
So there was a phone book, and it had a list of pretty much everybody that worked in the building, their number, their roles, and you could use that to do a social engineering attack.
Absolutely. Thank you. So this is real life. We went through a real building, and hanging on the phone was this information. You might say, well, Derek, is just a phone book. Well, if I'm doing spoofing, I'm doing social engineering, two things can happen. I can, number one, say I'm Guy who works at the help desk, and I need you to give me your password because we're doing whatever we're doing, and you give it to me. Or I can use that to go after the big fish. I know who the folks are. I know who Guy is now, so I'm gonna call Guy up or whomever. But it had their name, what they do, which office they're in, where they're located, their phone number, all this valuable information hanging on the wall. And by the way, this was a Saturday with nobody in the building, and we went through this entire building and saw a whole lot of other things that were wrong as well. But this is one of the main ones. But that's spoofing. All right, so I'll tell that story, a long story, just to get to what spoofing is. All right, we can have tampering. All right, I'm sorry, my fan blew my page away. Give me 1 second here, sorry. Anyway, we have tampering with the different devices and things. Oh, here it is. Okay, so tampering. Any action resulting in unauthorized changes or manipulation of data. Repudiation, I told you what non-repudiation is. So repudiation, the ability of a user or attacker to deny having performed an action. This is very important when I'm doing forensics and things like that. You tell me you didn't do it, or that pornography that's on the computer wasn't done by you, you're gonna have a problem. And let me tell you, that can really happen, because if you're being used as a bot, the bad guy is gonna store pornography on your computer at home, and you not even know you're part of a bot farm, and then the FBI or someone finds out you have this pornography on, and you have to repudiate that you downloaded this stuff. And they're gonna say, well, it's on your system, prove that you didn't do it. And you might be going to jail because of this. So repudiation. We have information disclosure, of course. That's where, of course, our private, confidential, what other information gets out to external unauthorized users. We have denial of services, where people are not able to use their computer for whatever reason. We're going to talk about different attacks in all these areas later on. And we have elevation of privileges. The ultimate goal of a bad guy is to elevate privileges. I get in using the janitor's password that only gets me to janitorial stuff. But once I'm in, I become an insider. And once I'm in, I move around, and you're not watching me. You're watching what's coming in the front door, but you're not watching what's happening in the back room. And my job is that I'm going to try to escalate my privileges, my power, and my access to be able to do certain things here. Now, here's your duty, and it's going to be a tough duty because this is just the beginning. You got a lot to learn. Memorize STRIDE and what each one of those stand for. All right? Any questions about those? Now, there's a new addition to the book, and it's called PASTA, or whatever you want to call it. But it also has its steps. So PASTA is the process for attack simulation and threat analysis. And it has 7 stages in it. I'm going to go through those. And folks, I know you're getting tired. Just bear with me. We're going to be wrapping up soon. We'll continue on in our next class. But we're actually pretty close for this. So I'm going to try to wrap up at least chapter 1 tonight. We'll be done with it. So bear with me for a few. But in stage 1 is definition of the objectives for the analysis of risks. See, this is a way for us to look at the risk that we have. It's a risk-centric approach that aims at selecting and developing the countermeasures we want to have in relation to the value of the assets that we're trying to protect. So first, we're going to look at the definition of the objectives for the analysis of risk. And we don't have to go through it, just kind of know what they are. And when you go through your book, they give you some diagrams and all that. But second, we're going to define or look at the definition of the scope, the technical scope that we have for the particular item. We're going to look at application decomposition and analysis. This is just surface. You don't have to know a lot about this. This is brand new. Stage 4 is we're going to do a threat analysis. Stage 5, we look at the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities based on those threats. Then we're going to look at how the attacks occur and do some simulation. And then we're going to analyze our risks and then tell management about it. And not only that, but figure out how we're going to manage those risks as well. Okay. So this is kind of another thing, another model that we have. And there's a lot of them out there. Just be familiar that PASTA exists. This is kind of what it looks like, each one of the stages. And we keep going through this for every asset that we have. All right. Now, once we do that, another part of our threat modeling, once we identify our assets and what the potential threats are and the attackers and all that, now we have to determine and diagram the potential attack. Okay. We look at an asset and say, how might that person attack it? So here's kind of what a diagram look like to reveal threat concerns. As you see, we have in this particular example, we have our users, and what happens? They have to log in. They put in a request to a web server, and then it's going to give them a response. Okay, we allow you to log in. I won't go through all these, but these are steps that we diagram, and this is going to tell us where our threat is going to come from. What do we see? Well, first of all, I look at the users. They have to give a login request. I'm sorry, somebody keep telling me to let them back in. Okay, so I look at this logon request, and what can happen? Well, there's a boundary there, and there probably needs to be a firewall there or something, an IPS, IDS system to look at the users that's coming into my web servlet there. So that's what we're doing. We're diagramming what happens, and this is part of architecture, to try to reveal what the concerns are around the threats. All right, that's our first step. So we diagram what our attack is. Now we identify that attack that could be targeted on each element in this diagram. You look at every step and what can happen. What can happen when you authenticate the user? What can happen when you look at the database? All right. Once I do that, I'm going to perform reduction analysis. So the next step in threat modeling is perform this, and this is known as decomposing the applications, the systems, and the environment. And the purpose for doing this is to see if we can get a greater understanding of the logic behind whatever it is that we're trying to protect. Okay, how we're going to protect it and what we can use for that. So, I'm sorry. Yes, okay. These are some of the steps we have here. So I'm going to do decomposition of it, break it down, look at it, see what we have here, and then we're going to look at the trust boundaries. So your trust boundaries is any location where the level of trust for security changes. So I'm going to go back to this diagram for a second. Here you see at the top it says user web server boundary. Anything that comes into our organization past that red dotted line now is part of our circle of trust, which means I've already vetted them and let them into my organization. Now, even with that, they at that first point, you see it has a login process where I authenticate the user and all that. And then through that, they can go down and use the college library database. You see another dotted red line. That's another boundary. You see the web server database boundary. I need to vet them again to allow them to get into my database. So those are all my positions of trust. The whole thing around security is that we're building trust. We have a trusted boundary, and once you're inside that boundary, I can trust you at certain levels. So I got to make sure when I open the door and let you in, I'm letting in somebody that's trusted. All right. Another thing, we have to look at the data flow paths, the movement of the data between locations. Again, you see that here. How's the data traversing, and what do I have to do to protect that data when it's in motion? We look at the input points. locations where external input is going to be received. Anything coming from the outside can be dangerous. So we have to know how it's getting in. Now think about this, not only our front door, but our components, your printer. Your printer is an entryway into somebody getting to your organization. You know, your phone that's connected. If you have a BYOB policy, a BYOD policy, not BYOB, I'm gonna need that after this, but BYOD policy. That's gonna look at, I gotta look at each one of your phones now and how that phone could allow somebody into my enterprise. So we can look at all the input points. We got to look at the privilege operation, any activity that requires greater privileges, like sysadmins and all that. See, a sysadmin has two accounts, if you don't already know this. They have a system administration account, which has privileged access to everything, and they have their regular user account. But I've seen many times where that sysadmin will go out and look at the internet, go to Amazon and buy something. Instead of logging out of his system administration account, he'll use that instead of his user account. And once that's compromised, if I can get in using that, I can escalate my privileges. It's already escalated. I can do just about anything I want there. Okay, so we look at the privilege operations and how we're going to cover those. Then we look at details about the security stance and approach that the organization takes. That's the policy. That's the security foundations. That's the security assumptions that I have. I'm going to break all this down and try to come up with the plan that I'm going to use for reducing my risks. So let me see the time, folks, because I know we didn't have it. You guys want to take a quick 5-minute break or just push through to 9 o'clock? This chapter is just about done. I got just a few more slides, a couple more slides. So want to go ahead and push through? Yes, no, maybe?
Yes, Garrett.
Okay, cool. All right. So next we have prioritization and response. So now once we identify all the threats through our threat modeling procedures and processes, now we're going to come up, and I know this all makes sense to my intel folks, but now we're going to prioritize our response, okay? Prioritize and respond. So the test has a way of doing this, right? And we're going to do it the way the tests do it in just a second. But we have the probability times the damage potential. It gives us a ranking of high, medium, and low. So the higher the damage that can occur, the more priority we're going to put on that, of course. You know, if it's top secret, that can cause grave damage, remember? And so we're going to put our controls there. We're going to spend our money there first. And our response is going to be there first. Now, on this exam, and you see the high, medium, and low ratings. But on this exam, we use something called a DREAD system. Okay? DREAD system. It's in your book. If you don't have it right now, it's going to be on page 37. But this is a ranking technique. Again, probabilitized damage potential is going to produce a risk severity number of somewhere between, in the DREAD system, between 1 to 100, with 100 being the most severe risk, all the way down to 1. So each of the values is going to show we're going to assign most of our resources. Now let's look at the DREAD system. This is the rating system designed for rating solutions that we want to use for potential problems. And we have 5 main questions we have to ask. First of all, we ask ourselves, what's the damage potential? How severe is the damage going to be if this threat is realized? Number 2, we ask ourselves, is the reproducibility question. How complicated is it for attackers to reproduce the exploit? If somebody broke in once, and let's say we didn't find it right away, can they easily break in again? Can they easily take advantage of this vulnerability, or this weakness, I should say, again? Next is exploitability. How hard is it to perform this attack? Then we ask ourselves, who are the affected users? How many users are likely to be affected by the attack? And then discoverability. How hard is it for us to find it? Yes, sir. Somebody had a question? Oh, I thought I had a question. Okay. So the last one was, how hard is it for an attacker to discover this weakness? Again, security by obscurity. It's not really covered, but how hard is it going to be for them to find it? So by asking these questions, along with giving them those ratings that you see above, high, medium, and low, that's going to kind of give us our priorities for how we're going to respond to those different threats. So that's how the DREAD system works. Almost there. And now we're going to take this information we have and we're going to apply it to make a risk-based decision. So apply risk-based management concepts to the supply chain and to making our decisions. Risk-based decision means that there's no way that I can secure everything. As they always say in our field, it's not if, but when you're going to be breached. But our job is to lessen the impact of any breach that we have. Okay. And that's going to be based on a risk-based decision. I can cover, because here's the thing, you don't have unlimited funds. So you say, I can cover this, but I'm going to have to let that one go, or use some kind of compensating control for that. So now applying this concept to the supply chain, as they say in the book, is a means to ensure a more robust and successful security strategy for everything that you do. So your supply chain, I'm gonna read it from the book. A supply chain is the concept that most computers, devices, networks, and systems are not built by a single entity. So what does that mean? We have to integrate these things together. And how are we going to integrate these things based on our ranking that we have and the things that we use? Whose firewall? Whose IPS system we're going to use? And everything has to work synergistically together to bring about what we're trying to do here. So we're looking at the resiliency of those integrated security components. We're looking at how much is the cost of ownership of those. Now, the cost of ownership is not just buying the components, it's also hiring people like you. If I have a firewall, I need to have a firewall engineer to handle that. You know, I have to have security engineers. I have to have, IPS experts and IDS experts. So that's part of the cost of owning that particular piece of equipment. Now, let me ask you a quick risk question. And Guy, you can't answer this question. If I have an asset that's worth $1 million, would you pay $2 million? Would you spend $2 million to secure that $1 million asset?
No.
I'm asking you all. No? Who said that?
William, I said no.
Oh, I thought it was Guy. I told Guy he couldn't answer.
It was Damien. I said no also.
Okay, both of you all say no. You wouldn't spend $2 million. Anybody else?
It depends.
Okay, so Guy, answer that question.
All right, so it depends. Even though the asset is worth $1 million, it depends on, I guess, the impact that it will have on the company. So if your company absolutely depends on that $1 million asset, then that would vouch for a reason to spend $2 million to protect it.
Okay, so Guy paid attention in his master's degree classes, but let me expand on that a little bit. Because you're going to say, well, Derek, that still doesn't make sense. Because I'll just buy another one for $1 million. But here's the thing. That $1 million asset, what impact did that have on protecting your reputation? And how much is your reputation worth? So if your reputation is worth $50 million, that $1 million component, and this is being facetious, you all, but it might be worth having $2 million worth of insurance on it to make sure that that $1 million item that protects $50 million worth of your reputation is intact. And so that's kind of the thinking behind it. It's not really the value. The value goes further than just that component. Let me give you another example. If I take your laptop and I steal your laptop, that laptop, let's just say, costs $2,000. But what's on that laptop? So what is the insurance company going to give you? They're going to give you $2,000 to replace your laptop. But what if it's the laptop with the 500,000 people that worked for the VA that they lost with all this information on it? Or how valuable is that recipe that you have that runs your entire business, and it's the Kentucky Fried Chicken recipe stored on that laptop? So yes, I might spend more to take care of that particular item in order to assure it. And I'm ahead of myself. We're going to talk about that in risk, but I just want to bring that while I was thinking about it. Another risk. Yes, sir.
Quick question. So you're saying that we need to, during the risk analysis, we need to do qualitative and quantitative risk analysis on
absolutely.
The okay.
Absolutely. And I'm going to teach you that. Yes, absolutely.
All right, thanks.
In the next chapter, we're going to talk about that, and thank you for that. We're going to talk about qualitative and quantitative and ways to get to that. Quantitative is easy. How much does it cost? But qualitative, how much is your reputation? Damien, who was that? Damien that said that? Asked that question?
Yes, that was me.
Damien, how much is your reputation worth?
Everything.
All right. So, is it 10 million? Is it 50 million? Is it 100 million? Because let me tell you, and I'll just give you this idea. When you think about Target Target reputation was hurt for a while because of what happened. And it wasn't even Target's fault. It was kind of their fault because they should have made sure that third party had the right security in place. Some of you are not old enough to remember this, but many, many years ago, there was a Tylenol scare where somebody was putting poison in some of the bottles of Tylenol. How do you think that affected Tylenol? Not only did stocks go down, but the sales went down across the country because everybody was scared to touch Tylenol. Now we look at it today and we're using Tylenol again like candy. But back then for a while, they took a hit. Their reputation took a hit. And sometimes your reputation take a hit to the point where you cannot return. It runs you out of business. So you have to think about when you're looking at this, how you're going to make that risk-based decision in your supply chain, how are you going to do that? Another thing is outsourcing. Should I outsource some of my risks? You know, outsourcing, I'm going to talk about the different ways to deal with risk in the next chapter, but outsourcing is one of the ways. If I say, okay, Booz Allen, come into the IRS and take care of all our security needs, I've outsourced it to Booz Allen. But who still has ultimate responsibility? I do. Well, let me tell you, everything that happens at the IRS ends up on the news, in the paper, and in front of Congress. And they're not going to say, Booz Allen, what did you do wrong? They're going to say, IRS, what did you do wrong? All right, if you're a doctor's office and whatever. I want to talk, I'm almost done, you all, but I want to talk about some on the scale level. See, you all understand this stuff, and big companies understand this. But what about that small doctor's office or that legal office with 10 lawyers in it? Now, think about a doctor. Doctors have HIPAA compliance. Do you think doctors understand HIPAA compliance? They understand it is out there, but they understand the IT security aspects of it. Do you have your legal offices that have their things they have to worry about, e-discovery and all that? I have a couple of buddies well, one buddy, he partnered with somebody, but anyway, he's in Atlanta. His practice is only legal offices and doctor's office. Now he's a trainer like me. He travels the country training, but he always keep 20 offices on his in any time, and they pay him a retainer to come in and do HIPAA compliance checks, to do PII checks and all that. Get a nice retainer. You got 20 companies. Let's just say you got $1,000 a month from each. He's a one guy business. You get $20,000 a month. Plus he travels and teach because it's a nice niche there. Booz Allen, CSC, and all they overlook these small offices. That's not enough money for them. Somebody pay you $1,000 a month or $10,000 a month. But for people like us, that's a business for you all if you decide to get together and do something like that. So I'm sorry, wrapping up. So I was talking about outsourcing, and that's what brought that up. Outsourcing to people like my friend Christina here, who has her own business now. Got out there and she's doing her thing. We're looking at doing integrated security assessments. Making sure that I was just talking about that. We're assessing what's happening in our organization, seeing and getting a picture of it, and making sure we're adjusting there. Monitoring and management. Monitoring is continuous. Managing our security is continuous. This stuff never stops. Every day when I see a breach, first thing I do is I say hooray, because we're never, as long as there's the internet, we're always going to be in business. We couldn't do any better than being in cybersecurity right now. Okay, project management is great, but cybersecurity and project management together is great. All right, so when we talk about monitoring and management, on-site assessments, documenting and reviewing, looking at processes and policies, doing third-party audits, we get into all this as we go on. So that, folks, I'm going to conclude that tonight with that. It's 8:42. I know you all are tired, but this is what I need you to do. Make sure you go back and look at the exam essentials. That's going to point out the most important things that I spoke about tonight. Review the chapter when you get some time. I want you to read the chapter. Do the labs if you want to, but make sure, if nothing else, look at the exam essentials and review the questions.